I'm an old basketball coach, so I can just stand out here. Is that all right? My dad was a football coach. As Matt said, I can yell a little bit if I have to. Thanks for your time. John Schmieder here. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona with the Huddle Up Group. Dean on our team, based in Hershey, Pennsylvania, is joining for this exercise. Dean's actually learning our process. He's new to our team, so if you want to haze anybody, you can haze Dean. This is his first trip. And for those of you that have seen this presentation, saw it last night, I apologize. You can ask the same questions if you want, because I'm probably going to make the same jokes as well. So you have to laugh at all the same jokes. So our organization, I was a sports commission guy for 16 years. I led the sports commission in Tulsa, Denver, and Phoenix. And I also spent 2 stints on the other side of the table with event owners at Pop Warner Football and Cheerleading. Here's your trivia question. Pop Warner is the largest cheer organization on earth. If you didn't know that, more girls on sidelines on Saturdays at those games than anywhere else on the planet. For membership organizations, 350,000 girls every year in a non-COVID time, right? And then I also work for Senior Olympic Games in Tucson, Arizona, my hometown. So based in Phoenix now. Dean is in Hershey. He came to us from the Hershey Sports Commission and the Convention Visitors Bureau there, so he has a little bit of a background like Matt and his team. And then we have 3 other full-time people scattered all over the country. As I was joking at dinner last night, we've always been a remote company, so we were kind of built for this thing. We don't have an office. But Caroline on our team, you'll see some of her fingerprints on some data I'm going to show you, is our data queen. She lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. She's our soccer expert. For you soccer folks, she's an All-American at Tennessee. And then Eric on our team's in St. Louis. He was the director of championships at the NAIA, so he's a collegiate guy and a big-time lacrosse guy for the lacrosse people in the room, so we have some lacrosse expertise in this presentation. And then lastly, Cole Mckeil just joined us in January, and he used to work for the Olympic Committee in the facility side. So he was in charge of all the Olympic facilities across the entire country for our athletes to train. If you wanted to train at any of the Olympic facilities, you had to go to Cole. And so we picked him up off of furlough, and he's been a great addition to our team as well. So we've worked with over 100 destinations like you. We've done a ton of work in this area. We've done work in Eau Claire. We've done work in Appleton. We know most of your sports Wisconsin friends in that group. We made a stop over in Stevens Point on our way up on Tuesday and saw some old friends there. So we're very familiar with this area, and a lot of the projects we've done like this, strategic planning with the facilities bend. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. That's really our bailiwick, is usually like college towns and smaller, to be honest. So we've worked with destinations as small as London, Kentucky, Colonel Sanders' hometown, population 7,500, all the way to Detroit, population 7 million, right? And we live in Phoenix, as I mentioned before, a pretty big population there too. So that's who we are and what we do. This project, I'm going to talk a little bit about the scope of what we've been asked to do by Matt and his team, and then I'm going to talk about the national sports tourism landscape, and then I'm going to get specific into Marshfield and what we kind of know today. We spent all day yesterday looking at venues, so we literally, I don't think we missed any of them. I think we put our feet in even into places that weren't on our list, like a couple of golf courses and things like that. So sports tourism strategic planning for an organization like yours is exactly what we do. It's about 85% of what we do. And that's what we're doing here, except for this is very facility focused. And there's a lot of conversations going on with the different sports groups on, hey, we want a different facility, or our facilities, especially in the ice sheets, are getting old. So should we just upgrade them, or should we start over, right? So hopefully we'll give you the playbook at the end that's going to give you the opportunity to advance those discussions from a fundraising standpoint, funding standpoint, what type of facility it should be if you build a new one, or how should we enhance the old ones that are here already. So the Sports Tourism Index is a product that we use to measure where we are today. It's a scoring system. It's proprietary to us. You've already completed it, and we're actually updating some of the data that's in it. And so I'll show you that in a moment. That's the first step. The second step are phone interviews and online interviews. I've interviewed many of you on the phone before we came, because we want to get a taste for kind of what we're walking into before we get here and do windshield time, like yesterday. Then we do the venue audit, which we did yesterday, and then we'll go home and write for a couple months, and then we'll send you a draft, and you'll get to use your red pen on it and say, don't say that, say this, go deeper here, take that out, that kind of thing. And then we'll come back and we'll do 2 presentations when we come back. We're talking about July, just to give you a timeline. And that's usually, we do a family meeting, we call it, which is really a staff and board, the internal house, and then we'll do a community one, which we'll invite everybody, media, hoteliers, restaurateurs. By then, hopefully, everybody will have their shots and we can have a bigger gathering. And then we'll give you the playbook, which is it's a strategic plan, but we're not, we don't put in basic things. We put in very specific things. Like, again, my dad being an old coach, we put in there who's going to call what play, when, and how we do it, right? So if we have a whole section on community engagement, and when you see that, it literally says do it every quarter, do this one every month, do this one this way, and it literally says who should do it and who we're reaching out to, whether it's a corporate environment, the hospitality industry, things like that. And then 30 days after that, we'll do a phone call with the staff and the board, usually staff and board chair. So Al, that'll be you. At that point, it's because there's usually the meetings after the meeting. So once we leave the playbook and do the community presentation, something will happen. And I'll give you an example. We're actually going from here. We're flying out of Appleton tonight. We're going from here to the Champion Center, for those of you that have been in it. We actually helped visualize what that facility would be if they were to build it in 2013. And so I've actually never set foot in it other than with a hard hat. So now I'm going to get to see it open for the first time, which would be cool. But that facility took 6 years from concept to concrete, as we like to call it, before they opened it. And in that case that came from the community meeting, because the city manager in Grand Chute actually walked up to us and said, if it's going to make that much of an impact, I'll give you the land. And so they literally donated the land 30 years for $1 a year from our presentation, the meeting after the meeting, right? So there'll be something like that'll happen here, I assume. Hopefully somebody will give us land, right? But that's why we give it 30 days to kind of percolate with everybody in the community after we leave. So now I'm going to talk about the national sports tourism scene and kind of what Matt and his team are up against, and then I'll narrow it down into this discussion and this project. So our national association is called Sports ETA, Sports and Events Tourism Association. It used to be called the National Association of Sports Commissions. I was chair in 2009 and 10, so I'm really involved with this group. I only show you this graph because the last 10 years, our membership of our association has doubled. And it's people like you, and it's people like Eau Claire, and it's people like Stevens Point that are playing. It's not Milwaukee, right? And it's not Detroit and the bigger markets I mentioned earlier. The smaller markets are trying to get a bigger piece of that $15 billion sports travel pie, right? Those of you that coach your kids, like you just gave me your stats of how much ice time you've bought outside of this market. Many of you understand that, but the previous 10 years, if I went this graph to the left, our industry doubled in that time frame too. And again, a lot of small markets that are trying to get a piece of the action. So that's important because we don't want to compete with Marissa in Milwaukee. She's one of my favorite people. She's the sports guru at Milwaukee at their CVB. She's tough and she's got a big budget and she's got good venues. So we can't play that kind of game against her. We have to compete more with the Stevens Points of the world, right down the street. So every year in December, we write an article, and it goes into a major publication in our industry called the Sports Planner's Guide. It's basically a small phone book. I'm dating myself, but because nobody has phone books anymore, right? It's the small kind of white, yellow pages. The version you used to get is probably 300 pages, and it literally has a preview of every destination and all the pretty pictures of their venues, and basically it's a selling tool. So we're like the Rick Riley, if you're a Sports Illustrated person. We write the back page, and it's always trends. It's usually top 10. This year was so weird, we did top 9, just because COVID was a different animal. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what those trends have been in the last several years, and then what the COVID trends are that we did in this year's edition. A lot of communities are creating their own events. You guys, a lot of the folks we've interviewed on the phone are running your own events, Mary Jo included, who just left, which is great. That's something we can build upon. How do we expand the figure skating events? How do we expand the soccer events? How do we expand the hockey programs? Things like that, and make them bigger, curling as well. And then having the CVB participate in how do we grow those, and then how do we work with our local rights holders and build new ones. It's very common around the country. We're getting away from like the bid game where you go to these trade shows, and again, bidding against Milwaukee is a death sentence. You're going to lose every time, right? So we want to create our own assets with our local partners. So that's happening around the country. A lot of CVBs are coming up with a sports brand. You're part of Sports Wisconsin, but a lot of them are like, for instance, in Eau Claire, they have a sports commission that's within the CVB, the Eau Claire Sports. So, and the reason they're doing that is because the rights holders on the other side of the table, when we do speed dating at these conferences to try and attract their events. And so when we're getting to know these people, they want to say, hey, are you going to put on a backpack and help me operate? Or are you really a CVB that just wants my hotel room nights and you don't really care about the rest? The sports brand usually alleviates some of that, but those rights holders are pretty smart. They can usually see through it if you're trying to fake it. But a lot of CVBs are doing the sports branding thing. So it would be Sports Marshfield or Marshfield Sports Commission or something like that. You have a grant program. Almost all the bureaus around the country, we're going to chime in on how you do that. And we think Dean and I were talking last night, there's a little bit better way, I think, to allocate those funds. and be intentional, which you'll hear a lot from us today. We even have clients that when they do the grants to their local promoters, if they don't follow up at the end, like with their pickup reports and how many athletes were there, where did they come from, all those types of things that are on your checklist, then you actually don't fund them in the future or fund them on the back end. Usually you give them half before the event, half after. We even have one client that has a clawback clause. So in Texas, so if they give you half the money, and then if you don't follow through after your event, they actually have the right to come back and ask for their money back. So it's getting really serious because there's a lot of CVB presidents, you need to cover your you-know-what because you're dealing with public money, right? The hoteliers are passing the money to you and you've got to use it for best ROI you can. So that's one way to do it. Bricks and mortar and what we're talking about in this project, 5 years ago, if I'd have stood here and I was Matt and you were my board and I said, hey, I'm going to use bed tax money to build a soccer complex. Al and the board probably would have run them right out the door. But nowadays it's happening in hundreds of cities around the country where the CVB is funding part of facility development so then they can use it for tourism to drive more tourism dollars that feeds the CVB, right, the wheel. It's happening all over the country now, and it's like Appleton's a great example that the Champion Center was funded by hotel tax money, right? And for that, this Matt at the CVB, their sports guy, has unlimited calendar access. He gets the calendar first, and then the local community gets it after that. So it's a complete mind shift to what we're used to, like in the Parks and Rec environment, where it's community first and then tournaments maybe later, right? So that's happening. Bricks and mortar development is happening all over the country for CVBs. A lot of the safety things we're dealing with, social distancing, the masks and all that, some of that's gonna stay, I think, after COVID's over, hopefully soon. But some of those safety measures that stay are gonna make our events a little more expensive. So the rights holder is either gonna charge the destination for that, or they're gonna add it to the registration fee for our athletes and our families, right? So one way or the other, we're gonna pay for it for some of those things. And then lastly, keeping track of the sports that are emerging. Anybody know what the fastest growing sport in America is right now? We saw it twice yesterday. I knew we would too. Every time we do tours, we see people playing it. Pickleball. They're based in Arizona. In the last 8 years, their membership has gone from 3,500 to 40,000. So like 12x in the last 7 or 8 years. Pickleball, BMX, Quidditch, kind of crazy. I didn't even know that was a thing. I've never seen the movies and I've never read any of the books, but it's a thing. There's actually two, as Dean pointed out to me yesterday, there's actually 2 Quidditch organizations in the United States that are running events and tournaments around the country. So we have to monitor those as they grow. And then also coming up here in a couple months, we have the Olympics, right? The postponed Tokyo Games, even with no fans in the stands. There's 6 new sports in the Olympic program. And what happens with those sports, and you'll say, well, we're a small town, we're not an Olympic city. We all are, because what happens is every time a new sport gets on the Olympic program, the kids see it on NBC and they think it's cool and they want to try it, right? So USA BMX, the racing version, is a client of ours. They're based in Arizona as well. They literally joined the Olympic program in 2008, but when it was announced in 2004 that BMX racing was going to be on the Olympic program, their membership in that 4 years doubled. And then once they got on TV on NBC, the kids saw it and their membership doubled again. So they went from like 20,000 kids that were registered members to 80,000 by the time the London Games came in 2012. So of the 6 sports that are coming, anybody know what they are? Those of you that were here last night can't cheat. Baseball, softball are back. Dean's a baseball guy, so he's happy about that, I'm sure. Baseball and softball are back together, kind of a unique setup. BMX freestyle is one, so you're gonna see a lot of the X Games type stuff in Tokyo. Surfing is one. Skateboarding is one. They're trying to get younger. Can you see this, right? The NBC is pushing the Olympic Committee to get younger. Because like when we were all kids, and I know I watched the Olympics with my grandpa every time it came around and sat on the floor at his house in Kansas, dating myself, 76, and then a boycott in 80 and all that. But I remember those vividly. But our kids aren't doing that anymore. They're not watching the games anymore. So NBC is pushing the International Olympic Committee to skew younger sports. So they're taking out things like they're cutting the wrestling in half so they can use those athlete slots because there's a charter that limits, I'm getting in the weeds, but there's a charter that limits how many athletes you can have. So they want to take they cut wrestling in half to then use those to have freestyle BMX come in, right? So they're trying to skew younger. So we have to monitor the emerging sports because if those kids come to those sports, it happened with rugby sevens in Rio last time. As soon as rugby sevens was on NBC, their membership doubled and more kids want to play. So that means more events for us to host and more kids in that sport, right? So we want to take advantage of that. So I got asked by the state of Texas, their tourism association, to do a COVID-specific like trends. And we had just done the trends article. So those were the trends from a few years back. And now what are they now? What's COVID going to do to us? And some of these things are already happening. And so I'll go through those really quickly. The created event thing is becoming more important because no parents don't want to put their kids on a plane, right? And so that was a trend before COVID hit. For about 2 years, a lot of the national events started getting more drive market. And the rights holders were seeing that, and they were talking about it out nationally at our trade shows and saying, look, our soccer event used to be 48 states, now it's 6, but it's still a national championship type thing. So that's only important. So when we do create new events, we need to realize that we have to recruit from a drive market, and we're not going to really try and market to athletes in other states that are going to get on a plane, most likely. So the created events and the regional drive, the first two are kind of related. The third one, and you've seen this already, I'm a golfer, not a very good one anymore, but I still compete. And the individual sports, this is a holiday in my house, is Masters Thursday, right? And so the individual sports have done really well. So golf, tennis, even auto racing, BMX to a lesser extent, and those Quidditch, not so much on the team side, but pickleball, all those individual events have done really well, and they're going to continue to do well, especially the outdoor ones. Right? So if we were out bidding on events or out trying to really attract events, I would focus on outdoor individual sports, right? Again, being intentional about what we do with the limited assets we have. Historically, the funding models, I talked about grant funds and grant fees. A lot of the rights holders are starting to realize, when I say rights holders, people that own events, from the NCAA all the way down to the little local soccer clubs, they're realizing they don't have the funding they had before. So we've got to figure out a different funding model that will work for both sides. The ways of, like when I started in Tulsa, I used to write a lot of checks and just hope good things happen, and we can't do that anymore. We don't have the resources. His budget's been cut by 40%. So which means your grant fund's down 40%. Some of the things you've supported in the past you can't do, right? Until we get our occupancy taxes back to where they were, and which will be hopefully soon. So we've got to revisit how those are worked. And then the last couple are really, we got to look at how we put on those backpacks and execute events. Those safety measures, again, are going to stay, some of them. And then unique ways to use our facilities. Like we had lunch in the, the Plaza yesterday. That's a pretty cool little venue. You could do some things there, right? And so how we program those, and even your sports facilities. Like here, where I live in Phoenix, we have, if you're not familiar, we have half of Major League Baseball spring trainings in Arizona. They're all in my county, right? It's not just the state like Florida. It's all consolidated. I went by one of our spring training sites the other day over the weekend, and it's a testing site, right? So they're doing the testing and shots, the COVID shots there. And then a couple of our other venues are using their parking lots for like virtual concerts. So one of them, the Rockies and Diamondbacks facility the other day had a Hootie and the Blowfish, kind of Darius Rucker concert, but they weren't even there. It was just a big screen in the parking lot, and nobody gets out of their cars. Another one nearby us actually does church services on Sunday in the parking lot. Nobody gets out of their cars, right? The pastor's up there live, but nobody gets out of their cars. And so using those venues for unique things, and that applies here as well. Yeah, Matt.
I mentioned this last night, but I just thought it was funny. There was a minor league baseball team, I think it was somewhere in the Midwest here, that they couldn't host any games. So they actually said, we're going to make it a driving range so that people tee off from the home plate and they can hit it into the stands.
Unique revenue driver, right? Again, individual outdoors, right? Golf. So all of that, what it means is we have to be very intentional, and I'll try not to use that word more than 3 or 4 more times, but we have to be very intentional with the limited resources we have, given what's going on today. And I'm going to show you specifically what I mean. And so I mentioned the Sports Tourism Index that we use at the first part of our process. It literally measures the destination in 4 buckets: facilities, destination strength, organizational structure, and your event background. How many events do you host every year? How many have you hosted historically? Do you own and operate any of your own events? So it measures all of those, and we built it 3 years ago with the help of over 100 event owners. So like US Figure Skating, for instance, we built it with their input. It's not like my opinion. And so we're trying to strip all the emotion out of everything we evaluate, right, numerically. We also recently launched a tool called Scout, which actually helps matchmake destinations with event owners on an online platform versus getting on a plane and flying and going and trying to beat Marissa from Milwaukee, my prior example, right? So Scout's another tool, again, a very intentional tool that's out there now. So these are now I'm getting more into Marshfield. These are your index scores. Nobody gets 100. The highest score we've ever gotten, I think, is 72. And they're a $3 million sports commission that's been at this for 35 years. So 21.98 is your total score. Your bucket scores, I gave a basic analysis and I compared you against the Midwest. And there's about 60 cities that are in the Midwest portion. There's 206 cities, I think, total on the platform. Your facilities are under indexed. That wasn't surprising. That's why we're here, I think. But we still have some updates we have to make. So once we saw the facilities, I called back to Carolina and said, hey, that baseball stadium where Legion plays is a lot better than the score it has. So tell me what was put into the score. And like we left out, I think, seating capacity, which is a good scoring thing. So we're going to update those. The golf courses weren't in there, so we're going to add both of those. The bowling alley wasn't in there. We're going to add that. So that should change it a little bit, but it's still going to under index, I think. And then overall, again, just against the Midwest, destination strength was under, largely because you don't have your own airport, so accessibility is challenging. We flew into, where did we fly into? Central Wisconsin, and we're flying out of Appleton, right? So a little challenging there. Your org structure is right about the average, and your events, the number of events you're hosting and how you're going about that's about average. But in the future, facilities are going to be king, and that's why we're here, so that's good. Now I'm going to get into some data stuff, and thank you for bringing that. That was really cool. She saw it last night and actually brought some data that compares to some stuff I'm going to show you. So we have some crazy Canadian friends. John D'Orsay is the CEO of a company called Event Connect, and they have a platform that those of you that run events, I'm not going to do a sales pitch for them, but those of you that run events, they have built a platform that literally does everything from registration to hotel to housing to scheduling fields, scheduling officials. It has a phone app that it talks to that then alerts parents if there's a schedule change or things like that. It all does it all in one place, in one platform. So you don't register on one and then get a link to a hotel block somewhere else, and it's all in one place. So we're having a conversation a couple years ago, and I said, hey, how much data do you have? And they said, well, we've done 10,000 events on our platform. What do you want to know? And I said, well, it'd be really cool if I could tell our hospitality partners, especially the hoteliers and the CVBs, if there's a piece of business that's better than the others. So can you do a comparison across all the sports? And so they did. They put this together for us, and they update it every year. And it's across the 6 biggest team sports that they do every year. So obviously across the top, basketball, volleyball, softball, and you can see. And the data we asked them for, well, he said, well, what do you want to know? I said, it'd be really cool if I knew how many athletes come with each team, how long they stay, how many rooms they occupy, how much they're used to spending on average, and those types of things. So if you look up there, me being an old basketball coach, it makes basketball look really bad. They book really late, 38 days usually on average before their event, which makes it hard on the hoteliers, right? You're getting ready to drop your block, and now here comes the coach going, hey, I need 9 rooms, right? And so their room count's low, and if you divide that actually by men's and women's basketball that's in there, it gets a lot worse for the men, because we stay 5 to a room, and the girls usually stay 2 or 3, right? So then you go down, they're used to paying a lower rate, and then which means your total revenue is lower, right? So, but if you go over, now if you had the venues, and we don't here in Marshfield, but if you had the venues to do any event you cared to do, baseball looks a hell of a lot more appetizing than the others, right? They book super early. We work with Ripken Baseball, they're a client of ours. They actually book when they leave a tournament in, like, say, Myrtle Beach, they actually book for the next year right then before they leave, right? So they're doing 365 days a year, and they're booking their block. So now you guys can maximize your RevPAR on the rest, right? On the rest of your inventory.
We have some of the baseball tournaments that are about a year out.
They're awesome. They're great. So baseball books the earliest. They spend a lot more money on the average hotel rate, which means the total's a lot bigger, right? So again, being intentional, if we're going to build a facility or something, we want to know who the user groups are and what we can plan on them to spend, right? So usually when I do these with hotel groups, their cameras all go up, but we're going to email you the slideshow. Another thing, and you if you haven't figured out already with the index and with like the stuff I'm showing you, we benchmark everything. So we survey the rights holders on an ongoing basis. We have 300 different event owners in our database. And we ask them, if you want to buy Marshfield versus Eau Claire versus Appleton versus Stevens Point in my prior examples, what is it that you want to buy? And there's really 3 categories. One is not on this slide, which means I don't want to buy it at all in total number of court count, field count, diamond count, whatever it may be. And then the second one is tournament-friendly facilities, and that is defined as a facility that can host a lot of our like state, local, regional type events. But if we want to do something big, something national, we're gonna have to cobble together multiple facilities, which is what you guys regularly do here with your basketball tournaments and the other things, right? And then the anchor facility is what they really want. And the anchor facility is like what we're going to go see in Appleton this afternoon. An anchor facility can host all of our big events all under one roof or in one parking lot or coming through one ticketed gate, right? The rights holders want to buy that. Like Ripken, we're helping them choose some sites right now for next year, and they're not picking any multiple site cities at all. They want at least 8 fields, preferably 12, all in one place. And so that's throwing a bunch of really good tourism cities out. But if you can build an anchor, pick your favorite sport up there, if you can do it, that's what they want to buy in number of fields. This says nothing about the other amenities they want. They want permanent Wi-Fi, ADA compliant. They don't want dirt parking lots. They want lights, right? All those types of things they want on top of that. But the pure field, court count, all that is up there.
And then ice is kind of included in that too, right? The field's ice and court.
Yeah. If you're not familiar, so Appleton's facility is 3 buildings. One's permanent ice sheet, one's permanent hardwood, 8 courts, and then the middle one goes back and forth between the two. So they melt the ice for half the year, kind of like you guys do here, and then they use it for ice for the main hockey season, and then they melt it down and they put sport court in it, use it for volleyball and basketball to support the hardwood facility in the summertime. So pretty cool building. So lastly, before we'll take some questions, again, benchmarking. So we surveyed all of our destination partners, those 200 that I mentioned that we work with, either through the index or through projects like this. And we said, tell us how many fields, these are the top 3 facilities out there, right? We need to do the ice sheet one. We haven't surveyed ice sheets before. So how many flat fields, how many diamonds, how many courts do you have in your community as a whole? And then your biggest facility is how big? And in that facility, how many tourism driving tournaments do you host every year? And then from that, how many teams on average are there? And then how long do they stay, right? And so this data came back again from people like Marshfield, came back from all kinds of different size cities. So again, if we were gonna index ourselves or benchmark ourselves against those definitely have more facilities, but most of them are bigger communities than 29,000?
20,000.
20,000? But you can see, so for example, if we were to go out and build a flat field complex, again, I'm making this up. If we were to go do that, we already saw what the rights holders want to buy. We know from a community perspective what we need for our kids, right? For programming during the week. If we're going to do it, we want to match up with these averages at least, right? And so we have those 2 charts I've just shown you, and the cross section would be 12 fields probably. And then we would expect to do 10 events. We would expect that there would be 91 teams, either lacrosse, Quidditch, right? Ultimate, if you're not familiar, you can Google that one. It's a really cool sport. But 91 teams per event, and they're going to arrive Friday morning, most of them, and they're going to stay all the way to Sunday, right? 2.5 nights. The one thing I'll point out here, same thing for diamonds and courts. The one thing I'll point out, that length of stay difference between 2.4 and 5 and 2.8 is very significant. So while the other thing made basketball look a little bad, I think this is volleyball driven. But that 2.8 means half the field, half of the teams are coming Thursday night. And that's a whole nother room night stay for you guys, right? Which is great. So again, data-driven decision making. If we build something like that looks and feels like those facilities, and we can do an ice one too, we need to know what the output's going to be. And part of our strategic plan and the facility side is when we make our primary recommendation for a facility, we're actually going to give an economic impact projection on what it would do for the community, right? With that, questions for myself or for Dean?
I'll just jump in real quick. Just want to recognize a few people here that have donated a bunch of time. With Kelly Siebernagel, we've been talking, and Jordan Munger from the Marshall Carling Club. Kelly's with ice skating. And then we had some hockey folks with us last night. Scotty's been really involved in hockey. We've been talking about this stuff for a couple years now, and we were hoping to start the study right as COVID started, but we decided to wait a little bit. So a lot of this is really in the works. I think most of the people in the room here, I've talked to and started getting involved, and so just it's going to take a team and a group. So thank you guys for being here. And I actually wanted to ask, did you and Kelly talked about some numbers of how many folks ice skating are leaving town?
Yeah, so we did a study in Fort Worth a couple years ago, and when we pulled the community together, and we literally as part of this study, we literally asked the big soccer clubs. So there's really 3 big ones in Fort Worth, and their flat field facilities in Fort Worth are not as good as the community is. To be honest, they're not, kind of indexing with where their community's at. On the flat field, the other stuff they have in spades. And so we surveyed the parents of the different soccer clubs. I think the biggest one has about 800 kids in it. And they're going next door to Arlington and then over to Dallas and up to Plano and Frisco and to play every day, to buy practice time like you're doing with ice sheets for your daughter, right? And so our survey said that actually, because the city council didn't want to fund a $40 million soccer complex. And so then we did the survey and we found out that in the prior year, the soccer club families had spent $13 million in economic impact in the next door neighbor's place, right? Buying time and spending money in the hotels and restaurants and literally going to Plano, which is only about an hour drive total, and staying overnight because they didn't want to drive all the way back and forth in a tournament, right? So 13 million bucks. We said, look, if we just build a facility like that here, in 3 years, we're even. I mean, I went to public school, but that's pretty easy math, right? So if we just build it here, we don't have to go somewhere else. And your kids that you coach, you don't have to go to Plano either, right? Now we can host those tournaments here. And so that's what got that project really going, and they're getting ready to dig right now. But you shared with me, you spent how much on ice time?
$500 this last year.
Which was a slow year for you, right?
And that's one parent, right?
And that's one daughter, one family. Now you multiply it, I think you have 15 or so girls at that level. And now the number gets bigger and bigger, right? And you said if Eau Claire's ice was down, you would have gone there and spent even more, right? So again, similar things, but Fort Worth's a bigger market, but it's the same thing. It's the same strategy. I'll tell you this, in general, as we go down this journey, the communities that have locked arms between community user group, like our families and parks and those recreational programs, and the tournament thing, the ones that have locked arms with economic development and tourism, lock arms with, say, Parks and Rec in the city on local programming, have been the most successful. Because usually, like our parks programs have, and I'm saying in general, they usually have a strategic plan and a facility, long-term plan that's underfunded. And so it usually gets half done before they go do another 10-year facility plan, right? And the tournament groups like CVB Sports Commission, it's going to be really hard for you to get all the momentum you need to do it on your own. And it's hard for parks to get what they want on their own. It's going to be hard for the different sport clubs to do something on their own, right? So if we all lock arms and we figure out how the puzzle pieces work on the funding model, it's much better because we can say, look, from an economic development standpoint, we can drive more tourism here. Our kids can stay in their own beds when we have tournaments instead of going to Eau Claire, right, or Milwaukee. And then on the other side, if we build a tournament-ready facility like all that stuff I showed you, our kids get a better place to play and practice on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right? And so if we can get that, and all the right players are here, it looks like your arms are already locked. It's just a question of can our playbook and our pathway help unlock the whole thing and trigger a complex of some sort. Other questions? Yeah.
You touched on it just briefly last night, but the state tourism has figures out for each visitor coming to town, how much money they spend a day, if it's just a day trip, if it's an overnight trip. How closely does that represent what spending is going on? Because obviously from the Chamber's perspective in economic development, we're interested in how does this impact our existing economic businesses or structure to our economic businesses here and create that ancillary spend and increase locally. Could you talk to what the spending levels are as it relates to these sports, as it relates to just normal tourism?
Yeah,
I can jump in a little too. We talked a little bit with us last night, but the State Department of Tourism recently, I think just this last year, the average numbers for visitors traveling, how much money they spend. If someone comes to your community for a day trip, they typically spend about $77, gas, food, shopping. If they stay overnight, it's typically about $144 in Wisconsin. And then I've done some math and looked at years past, and with our downturn this year, basically there's $15 million that didn't get spent in Marshfield because of the lack of visitors with COVID. And so there's $15 million that's not out there supporting the restaurants, the hotels, the shops, and then the tax dollars associated with that. But and John, I know you mentioned that kind of mirrors a lot of the sports travel numbers.
Yeah, it's really close. So our National Association does surveys like that on the sports tourism side, and I think the day spend number for tournaments was $79 last time they did it, which was in 19. So apples to apples, old pre-COVID versus what's going to be in the future. And the overnight stay, I think, was like 152 or 157.
One thing that you got to dig in the numbers a little bit more. That's per person. So if there's a family of 4 staying in a hotel room, that's more like $500.
And that's an average. So I could go back to that chart too. Go back to this one. That's an average for all of the sports, individual and team. One thing I didn't ask you on this one, after they did this for us the first time, I said, well, who spends the most? Like, take the team element out of it, right? Guess who spends the most money when they travel? No, and they stay longer too. They're not up there. Who travels in bigger packs, boys or girls? Girls, by far. Yeah, so side note, Amateur Athletic Union, AAU, does a study every couple years they survey their athletes and their families at all the different events that they do. So 18 and under, when you send your boy to, let's just say, a basketball tournament, how many people typically travel with your son? I have a 4-year-old, he's not there yet, but 0.9. Here you go, coach. See you Sunday, right? How about girls? 3.2. So if we're going to be intentional, do we want girls coming to our community or boys? Girls. So I already told you the girls travel better, they stay longer, they spend more. So on the girls' side, which sports would that be? Number 1 and number 2?
Volleyball.
Close. Gymnastics is pretty good. Lacrosse is getting closer. Cheer and dance is number 1. So we'll clean up the glitter off the floor when they leave. We'll take that money, right? And the second one nobody ever gets is field hockey. Very affluent, very East Coast, and very female, right? Like we don't even have men's field hockey in the Olympic program, but we do have the women on there. So, so again, if we're going to get intentional, we have one client that actually is trying. Their mantra is we're going to be the number 1 sports tourism destination for youth female sports. And they literally have like neon signs all over their office about that's what we're going to do. And being intentional for them means when they're talking to parks about helping to fund new facilities or expanded facilities of what they already have, they literally are telling parks, we're not funding anything that's not female friendly. Meaning we want wider walkways, more lights in the parking lot, the bathrooms need to be family friendly, right, with changing stations and all that stuff. And oh, by the way, no 300-foot fence softball complexes are allowed. All fast pitch and all permanent fencing. No, the Wednesday night beer league that I would play in doesn't count. We're not going to bring in temporary fencing for the girls to play. They want to, when they walk into our facilities, they want to make sure that those girls and those families know that it was built for them, right? So no temporary fencing allowed. If they achieve that, they will send major ripples through the mid-market. It's a mid-market community, through the community. Yeah.
So Mary Jo has left. She is watching here, though.
She's sending in.
She is sending in a question. That's right.
Great.
So on behalf of Mary Jo, she's remembered over the last number of years that tax rate in Marshfield has increased. The credit rating has decreased. All this has happened simultaneous over the last few years. So she'd like you to talk about FEMA grants or other things and a complex I'm not familiar with, but she's mentioned Hatfield as a sample of where government funding or FEMA grants or other things like that have been involved and how that could be applied in a community like this.
Yeah, I think the funding mechanism.
Hang on.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mary Jo.
It's Hatley.
Oh, Hatley.
No,
All right, sorry.
It's the facility, 50,000 square foot, a dome facility that Hatley's building. And I've been working with that group over in Eau Claire just to get ideas on it. But what do you know about dome facilities and FEMA grants to help pay for this? Because I've done some research and we can very easily write a grant to help us pay for this facility as long as it's accessible to in an emergency situation for FEMA.
Yeah, Mary Jo, this is Matt. I think that's basically what Spencer did. They're building a dome, correct? Is that right, Justin? Are you familiar with that project?
Yeah, they're building a dome. I don't know the funding.
I do think they got about $1 million grant from FEMA because it's an emergency evacuation center,
There you go.
basically.
So that may be your answer. We haven't done any direct work with them. However, we're doing a project in Omaha, and one of the funding mechanisms, they had a park that it's on the river and it keeps flooding. And so FEMA just said, look, we're tired. It was like 3 times they had to pay to restore this park because it's on a federal river. And like, we don't want to fund that anymore, so take the money and use it somewhere else that's not on the riverbank. And so we're actually taking that money and we're putting it into as one piece of the puzzle to fund a total renovation of their largest park, which has really been a recreational parks and rec facility, and we're going to try and make it tournament quality. So we're basically going to regrade the whole thing and start from scratch, but $3 million of that is coming from FEMA from the other part because they're tired of paying on that one. And so they said, you can pick it up. As long as you do the same number of fields that are there at the new place, which we're actually doing more, you can move the money. So that's a creative thing too. If you got into that situation, you could bring it in. Yeah.
All right, and then just an anecdote reminded me of, I talked to our local American Legion baseball coach just last night, and he had remarked to me that for the last number of years, and including this year, they play in a 3-day tournament in Eau Claire, a 2-day tournament in Appleton, and a 2-day tournament in Onalaska, which is lacrosse. This year, and do commonly do that just because of space unavailable here in this community. So I know you've been to the baseball field yesterday,
Yeah,
and
it was nice.
it is used often, and that is why they are essentially being chased out of town. That's the wrong word, but they want to find games, and so they're taking their, like you were saying, they're taking their money elsewhere.
Yeah. Good. Any other questions?
I just wanted to see if maybe if Jordan and or Kelly would just, one of the key elements of the study we're hoping to talk about is if a new winter sports complex in Marshfield is feasible, is there the demand for it, how would we maybe manage it, how would we fund it, and so that's one of the pieces, and I know there's some other complex and ideas that are floating around the community too. So I maybe just I think that both of the groups are having a lot of challenges, and I don't know if everybody in the room kind of knows what's going on with the current facilities. Do you mind, Kelly, giving a brief overview of kind of what we talked about with some of the challenges of the current facility?
Yeah, so for figure skating, and this year, I maybe won't focus on this year in particular, but our girls like to do some off-ice practices, and so we have to go find other facilities to do that. We can't do that in our current location. We are currently struggling with the exhaust system, and I don't know if it's the exhaust system that's causing it, but our carbon monoxide levels go pretty high on us fairly often, so I'm pushing a green button all the time to re-kick in that exhaust fan to keep it safe for our skaters. And then ice time is very difficult to get. We only have ice so many months out of the year, so I personally drive to Rapids and Eau Claire often for ice time. We have other skaters that go to Wausau and Stevens Point, or to other rinks that are used regularly by our Marshfield figure laces skating club. It's just, and then the ice time, we have Wednesday nights and Sunday nights for figure skaters because hockey has more volume, has more players, and they need the ice more often.
And then also, kind of talking hockey stuff from what we've been discussing, they need a new roof. Their cooling system is probably needing some help. So there's probably at least $500,000 to maintain the current operation they have. And they also have a 5-year lease with the fairgrounds that expires, and then their building is given back to the city. So that's kind of one of the elements that's out there. And Jordan, you want to touch on?
Yeah, so similar structures. I don't know if any of you have ever been in the curling club facility. It was kind of built on city land, so we lease the space from the city. But it's a pole shed that we kind of built. It's not a typical curling facility. Typical curling facilities are insulated. Other sides of the coin is that, again, possible new roof that we need in the next 5-10 years. New compressor. Our compressor is from the 40s and 50s, was retrofitted from a beer chiller. So we actually stick money into it every year just to make the thing go. But the idea here is we found kind of commonality behind us that, hey, we're all going to be sticking money into our facilities the next 5-10 years here. Does it make sense to combine them, find synergy, use efficient space, I guess, or even potentially even cooling capacity from our mechanical there at all? And I mean, we're at the precipice here where we can make a decision to either come together and make a complex that could fit those needs. And if it works, great, that's awesome for all of us. Otherwise, we have to end up sticking it into the same facilities and never knowing what we could be doing. Like for curling, I'll touch on the events. We are capped at 16 teams. We cannot have a bigger tournament than that. That's as many as it gets, and that's 64 people at all. Many of the 4-sheet clubs, and we're 3 sheets. If we were 4 sheets, we could do 32 teams, because 32 teams is what you can handle in that facility. But we'd also have to have a little bit extra space for the people that are coming to the tournament. So, and a lot of that can be fit in with, bigger bathrooms, locker rooms, common space that could be used for other tournaments if we were to be able to schedule it right or get it on the right plan. So it's kind of coming together and seeing, can this work together? If it can, awesome, because this is what we can stand to gain.
Yeah, that's great. And like Jordan said, if they had the right footprint, they feel that they could grow the tournaments, do more of them, bring more visitors to spend more money here. And that's something we're gonna, with the study, kind of, is there the demand for that? Where could we draw from? Who would come? Same thing with ice skating. I know Kelly and her group has said, we'd love to, host some tournaments here. And I think we've seen there's some demand for figure skating, but they just don't have this ice time or the space. Hockey has done a great job with the elements they have. I think they're pretty much capped at 8 to 10 teams. Is that right, Bill? For one sheet? Or I know Scotty. Yeah, we've talked about that, and I think I actually the Champion Center thing in Appleton. I've worked with them a bit and learned from them. And again, it's this beautiful, amazing, huge facility. If we could be the little stepbrother of that, I'd be okay with it. But they told me they hosted a 46-team hockey tournament, I think, like last year. And they had 5 other groups that wanted to run tournaments there that they didn't, that either went somewhere else or didn't have a tournament. And then some initial data is I think the first year the Champion Center was open, it brought $8 million into the community.
They're sold out until August of 2022 right now, every weekend, either hardwood or ice tournament.
And then one other element too that I think we've started discussing is like, say if a winter sports facility that can serve as ice skating, hockey, curling is in a chunk of land, and then if they're some of the groups talking about a new core facility with basketball and volleyball, you can use the same parking lot. You put them next door to each other. There can be some shared facilities, and so that's I think something that's trending out there and that makes sense if you can make it work.
There's definitely an alignment with like the spaces that the hockey club and that facility needs that it doesn't have, and the spaces they need that it doesn't have. So, and then I'll tell you, one of the good things that came out of the Champion Center project is they had the same thing. Their figure skating club was capped. They had a bunch of girls on the wait list because they didn't have enough ice time. They were getting the same kind of times you are, 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday, things like that. What that's and in a facility that needed an upgrade, the 2 old sheets they have there. What that's enabled them to do with the Champion Center is it's enabled them to free up those 2 sheets for community use more often. So all the clubs are getting better practice times now, even if they can't afford or don't want to go in a Champion Center to do it. Yes.
Question as it relates to as you come back with the results of the study, I'm just wondering if there's a great deal of collaboration that happens here in central Wisconsin between the communities that are here in central Wisconsin. And I'm just wondering if your report would address maybe an ancillary benefit to our facilities. Maybe it's not an event or thing that Marshfield itself is doing, but it's something that's being done in Wausau, and they're using Marshfield facilities to accentuate that event, or it's something in Wisconsin Rapids, and we're able to use Marshfield facilities to help with that event. Any opportunity is something like that addressed?
Yeah, it won't probably not addressed in the actual study, but working with like Stevens Point. I mean, USA Curling's based in Stevens Point, right? So Tom V is our events guy. We got to be Tom V's buddy, especially if we put new ice down, right? And so, those types of things. And if they have ice obviously there. So if they're doing a big Bonspiel, right, maybe we can do a bigger one. Or if it's not terribly far, that drive was pretty quick. It was quicker than 30 minutes for sure. So it won't specifically be in there, but within Sports Wisconsin and all of your 20 plus destination members, I think there will be opportunity.
Yeah, well, one thing that I don't think we touched on here yet today is that the amount of people that are serviced from Marshfield and the area for these events and activities. I know Jordan, the curling club typically has between 100 and 120 members, and their families are involved a lot. Hockey, typically over 200 families, I believe, and kids, is what I've been told. And then ice skating around 100 kids and their families. So we're talking about, it's almost like 2,000 people that are involved with the kids and the families in these events and activities. And actually, as far as I know, hockey, I think almost maybe a half or third of them are from Auburndale, Neillsville. It's like we're surrounding the area. And I want to thank Chad coming from Wood County today that, this can be a boon for the county, not just Marshfield, because they're servicing a lot of different things. So.
Awesome. I think we're up against our time. Any last questions before we adjourn? We'll be around for a few minutes after if you want to ask something not in front of the class. We can do that. But thanks for your time. I look forward to coming back in July and with our playbook and handing that off, and we'll see you all then, if not before. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.